So welcome to Swishoes. This podcast is on Neuro-Linguistic Programming, NLP as it's commonly known, and I'm delighted to say that Peter Wright, Armin Scharlach and Ciaran Crossan are here with me to talk about NLP. I was intending to go on an NLP training course some years back, but a motorbike accident cut me off and I never made it to that training course. So I'm an interested and enthusiastic amateur in this field. So I'm going to ask Peter Wright if he could tell us a little bit about how he came across NLP, experienced NLP, and some of the practical uses he's made of it and where it's taken him.
I suppose the first thing I'd say is there are parts of NLP that I still use, and actually in preparation for this wrote down a few of the things that were really useful. But interestingly, a lot of the techniques that NLP talks about, I've sort of left behind. I think some of the structure of subjective experience is really interesting. So I joined Wrigley's as a young production planner, managing a small team in 1996. And the guy I replaced had a reputation of being an absolute arse. I think I can get away with that, Bill.
Get away with anything on this.
Okay. And then everybody said he went on an NLP course and changed. And he'd just been promoted to a regional job in Germany. And I was like, never heard of this NLP thing. And you talked about planning to go on a course. Well, I did. I read books. I went on the odd one-day taster session. And then in 2007, I actually convinced somebody I was working for at the time to pay for it. So I went and did it properly. And then that went from 2007 to 2012. So I did what they call practitioner, master practitioner, and actually ended up as a certified trainer with no intention of training. But they always say if you can teach something, you probably understand it at a different level. So I'm going to stay away from all the technical stuff unless I get asked later on. The biggest aha I had in the first week of experience NLP is this whole concept of you don't experience reality. You experience your view of reality. And one of the nicest examples is spiders. If spiders are scary, we'd all be scared of spiders compared to gravity. Whereas if you step off a cliff, you're going to fall. And that just opened a window in my mind that sort of went, hang on, if we only notice what we notice, that's quite interesting. And then within NLP, and Bill, I want to go to the language thing because I think that's the biggest single difference. If ever I'm in real trouble, I listen to what I'm saying to myself, or I will listen to the person I've got in front of me, because the language, and I'll give you classic examples. I must do this, right? Means there's a rule in there somewhere. Well, why do you have to do it? What makes you have to do it? What will happen if you don't do it? And when you talk about this in a business point of view, influencing, performance reviews, why do you turn up late? Or why do you act in this way? Or why do you... And we don't use the word why very often because it's frowned upon. But the language patterns, and there are three. But fundamentally, when somebody talks, they tend to either delete, distort, or generalize. And the technique is to take them a level down. You made me this. Okay, how did I do it? How did you feel? How did you? And in a business relationship and in a personal relationship, that's quite important. I think one of the other things that really sounds simplistic but has become very mainstream is people talk about representation systems. What does that mean? Look, as human beings, we see, we smell, we taste, we think, and we hear. People have preferences. And it's very similar to Myers-Briggs, which is you just need to know what your preference is. And then it gives you a chance to make sure you're addressing the other options. So if I'm giving a presentation and I'm quite a visual person, it's the old adage of, you present pictures to marketing people and tables to accountants. But when you think about how the habitual thinking they've got, or the way they tend to look at the world, it makes perfect sense. So when I do a presentation, or whether I'm helping somebody put a presentation together, it's like you've got an audience of 100 people. They've all got a different view of the world. So how can you make your presentation appeal to as many people in that world? So you might say, I hear this, I can see this, here is the data. If you look at this picture, and then you've really covered for those of you that are reflecting on what might be wrong with this conversation, you make yourself able to broadcast on a more broad frequency. And so for me, I wrote down why it was important and I went influencing performance reviews, objective setting. I'll give you the objective setting one. They talk about spectrums and there's a few of them, but I'll take it because Bill mentioned internal versus external. If you have an employee who is internally referenced, as they would say, they're basically going, I don't care what the world tells me. If I think I'm right, I'm right. That's the one extreme. And the other extreme is if the world doesn't tell me I'm doing a really, really good job, I feel insecure and I hate myself and I think everybody thinks I'm rubbish. Now, everybody's on a spectrum, and knowing where your employee is on that is quite important because if you've got somebody in the I'm always right category, that can be problematic, as can the other extreme. So, how you balance your feedback to those people, the person who needs the motivation versus the person who actually needs a conversation that helps them to see how they can get better. And this is very practical stuff. It's not like if you're objective setting, another one is towards and away from. Sorry, Bill.
What you've described to me is outstandingly good because you've sort of confirmed that NLP ties together an awful lot of things. It's sort of at the root of how we understand the world around us. And therefore, whether you're talking about personality types or Nietzsche's philosophy, God is dead, or we don't experience anything and there's nothing is real, NLP seems to tie it together. I've never really understood why the average person needs or should understand NLP. So I'm looking for, and you mentioned the practical elements of it. So I'm looking for what are the practical elements that you think, what's been particularly useful about NLP to you?
The other things I said was listening and engagement. If you Google NLP, you'll come up with fundamentally manipulation and seduction. I mean, they are what it was famous for. Use these techniques and you'll be able to get anybody you like anywhere you want them to be. I found that within that, there were some really useful things to do, which then sent me on coaching courses, which then introduced me to the neuroscience. And I want to end in the neuroscience piece because I'm not sure I would suggest that anybody went on an NLP course anymore. But what I am fascinated on is if you look on the internet at the moment, and if I will look on my Facebook feed or whatever else, or X or Instagram, everybody's talking about understanding AI. How can you operate if you don't understand how you operate and how other people operate? So my argument would be, and I'll give you another example, creativity. We've all been through an education system that was designed to prepare people for work. There are two systems in the brain for creativity. One is task focused, one is task neutral. I've never been in a business, unless it's one where I've been very lucky to work with people who think like I do, where you'll just tell people to say, you know what, we're not going to sit in this room and solve this problem for the next 4 hours. Why don't you all go and play golf, walk your dog, or have a shower? But I would challenge you all to say, when you've had a really sticky problem that logic wasn't solving, where did you get that insight? And most people will go, the dog, the golf course, the shower. Intuitively, in intellectual organizations, we value the logical side. But when you look at the neuroscience, if you want to connect things for innovation, you almost have to step away and use what they call task focused. And yeah, I can get into the science behind it, but the number of times we've had issues in business where I would just go to the team, forget about it, go away, we'll come back Monday, see what we think. Don't worry, if we haven't solved it, we haven't solved it. Nobody else has solved it, otherwise we'd have a solution. And then you come back and everybody goes, you know what? I was into one of the other three things I mentioned. And this came to me. It's almost like you take the pressure off. An analogy I like is it's a bit like being in the world's best library and you brief the librarian. And as the librarian walks off to get you what you want, you ring the bell again. They walk back. Whereas if you're not task focused, you go, right, I've told the librarian what I want. I know it will deliver. The problem with it is it will always deliver, but you can't guarantee when. It's that, oh, what was that song called? And you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and remember. But if you put the two together, you're actually doubling your creativity. Right, I'll stop whinging then.
I love if you can't understand yourself, how you expect to understand artificial intelligence. I love the golf, the dog walking and the shower, because every time I come out with an idea, they say, oh God, Bill, you've been walking the dog again. And also an interesting piece about you don't these days recommend that everybody goes on an NLP course. So you're past that first flush of it's the answer to life, the universe and everything.
I knew too many NLP people who were miserable, upset, experienced their emotions. And actually, I think it's gone more to a reductive model which says, look, if you're trying to control your thoughts, that's bloody hard work. If you're trying to control your thoughts 24/7, the only thing I can guarantee is you're going to fail. If you accept that they're only just thoughts, you don't have to take them out for dinner.
I don't. You think that's reductive?
Well, because you don't have to do anything. The days of, oh, well, I'll squeeze my ear or tap my wrist, or I'll do a reverse timeline, or the bottom line is, if you're experiencing trauma, it's because you've put the trauma CD back in the DVD, back in the DVD player, and you're reliving it. It's not happening to you in the moment.
I think the difference is between trying to control 24/7 or being aware of. And I think awareness is a very important thing that everyone would benefit from. But control is probably a little bit too much. You're right.
There's days I want to be James Bond and imagine swinging through the corridors. I hate it when my wife says, "What are you thinking?" And I'm like, I was just imagining being James Bond. Because you can't really control them. And also my mother-in-law would be worried because I regularly contemplate killing her. It doesn't mean I do it.
I love it. What I really like is you already have in the first couple of minutes opened a much wider view on NLP than what I had before. As I mentioned in my introduction, being a consultant, the way how I typically have come across NLP was from a very procedural perspective in business applications, predominantly in sales, where things like mirroring or touching the other person, all these classical stuff, they are taught because they do work, but they are, what was the word that you were using? Not fishy, you mentioned it with difference. At least they have a somewhat of an unethical taste, and rightfully so. And this is why I had so far spent more time on trying to recognize when someone was trying to do these things with me than to proactively applying them myself. But what you have just opened is a much wider, much deeper perspective on what NLP can actually mean. It almost philosophical already, yeah.
Yeah, and you just used my favorite one, and I'd forgotten I used to do it. I used to love, so I was in procurement, so I'd see salespeople a lot. And this whole idea of, I'm going to mirror, I'm going to match. And you'd start to, and I'd go, yeah, I know what you're doing, so I'm going to scratch my nose, and they'd scratch their nose, and I'm just going, I'm having so much fun with this. It was, yeah, I mean, I know that's not fair. It's a bit like shining a light at a cat. I'll tell you what my NLP teacher told me, a wise Irish guy called Reg Connolly, who is still teaching NLP to this day. He said they modelled the experience. The bottom line is the easiest way to get rapport is to just be genuinely interested, because rapport is a natural outcome of being interested. So you can fake it or you can do it properly. Because if you watch kids, adults, couples, they fall naturally into rapport. Now, I can create rapport with people by modeling their body language, we did things like blinking patterns and breath patterns and all the rest of it. And at the end of that, he says, right, you can have the certificate, but now I'm going to tell you the true trick. Just genuinely be interested, because then you can forget about it and it will happen. And that's why I think it's a reductive model, Bill. Did that make sense? It's just like...
Absolutely.
It did, but there's one exception to what you were just describing, and I'm not sure whether officially what these pickup artists are doing falls into NLP, but I think there's at least a wide overlap. And one of the things that they typically tell is that you should ignore the best looking woman in the room, and that ignorance is what is attracting the other person.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm gonna say something that might come out as controversial, but I first encountered NLP would have been around the turn of the millennium. We had a site manager that was very much into NLP, and he talked an awful lot about it, and he liked to pretend that he programmed himself for high performance. But I read a review of a book, and this I think was about 2004, 2005, by an author called Neil Strauss, and it's called The Game, and that's about these pickup artists. I still have the book, it's still on my shelf, I did read it. That does not mean that I have a long line of, redheads, hairdressers, girls called Tiffany coming out of my apartment. Because I don't want to get my car scratched that much with car keys. But I read the book, more or less as entertainment. But they were very much in that sort of frame. It was very much a frame of mind, and I think they called it negging, negating the other person's image of themselves was kind of how they would approach their victims. Having read the book, I did go and read 3 other books that I have on the shelf by Grinder and Bandler.
He's
Grinder.
one of the founders. It
Yeah.
was Bandler and Grinder. Grindler was the linguistics expert.
Yeah. So I have
Bandler was the dodgy one.
Yeah. So I have their 3 books, The Structure of Magic 1 and 2, and Frogs into Princes. I did read them, but I can't ever really say I fully understood what it
they're
was.
They're a bit of a dry read. I could fart dust after reading them.
Okay. I can't say that I could ever understand, what they were really getting at. But I think one of the powerful things that I took from I think it was Frogs to Princes was when you're engaging with a person is the eye contact. You can tell by a person's eyes whether they're accessing their imagination or their memory to give you the information that they're talking about. And that kind of ties into that whole not being lied to. Everybody has an inbuilt sort of BS detector. And you can almost sniff it instinctually. What these guys did was they really give you the telltale technique that while your detector might be going off, saying, I think what I'm getting here is a stream of nonsense. If you look at where the person's eyes are, you can tell where they're getting that information from in their head. But like I say, I read the books. I didn't really take that much out of them. Maybe I should reread them.
I wouldn't.
You wouldn't? Okay.
If you wanted to read a good book on NLP, I'd recommend some other stuff. They really are dry, dusty. Certainly Structure of Magic 1 and 2. Unfortunately, when I said I was a nerd of reading everything Bandler and Grinder did and everybody they taught directly. I also read the game, because at the time I was of an age where I thought it might be useful, but not. So there's 2 things I want to do there. The eye movement thing is the one thing that we've proven isn't true.
Right, okay.
So the up left, up right, down right. But, and unfortunately, when the neuroscientists tried to prove it, it's the first thing that failed. So then everybody went, you see, NLP is just BS. The reality is, if you're talking to somebody and their eyes are moving, they are thinking. So shut up, because they're not with you, they're in their head. When their eyes stop moving, they're back in the room, to use a metaphor. And so it is useful, but it's not useful in the way it was originally said. And I'll explain why. If you think about accessing an old memory, there is an argument in neuroscience that every time you rebuild a memory, you're building it from several parts in your brain. So the question then, is it a constructed memory or is it a real memory? There's no such thing as a real memory because your memories exist between the gaps between the cells in your synapses. So the only thing I would take away from that is if somebody's eyes are moving, they're thinking, they're not with you, which I think is quite practical. Yeah. It's a useful piece of information. That's why I would point people more towards the neuroscience and the processes rather than the techniques.
Yeah, but I mean, and just to fill out sort of my thought on that, this week in the Economist, the Economist referenced the game in an article when it was talking about, in some ways, I both kind of agree and disagree, but they referenced the game as almost being sort of one of these kind of OG1 cases or patient number 1 in the sort of toxic manosphere, which I do certainly think that kind of pickup artist trend, which continues around the world, is in the toxic manosphere. But the game itself was just an investigative work. In my reading of it.
I think it's interesting. I think men have been trying to get women into bed and the other way around since time immemorial. If I think about, I can't remember what it was now. Is it Anchorman where he puts on the aftershave?
Oh, yes. Sex Panther.
Sex Panther or whatever it is. And you're like,
there's a whole world out there I'm totally unaware of.
Yeah, no, but I mean, one of my favorite movies, by the way. Yeah. But, I think the art of seduction, whether from the male side or the female side, is a very interesting discussion. I think you have to go back to the behaviors. You talked about negging. It did come back to me. I knew it would. If somebody is externally referenced, which is what we just talked about, they want to be liked and accepted into the group. We are tribal animals. We act tribally. And therefore, if you're in a small group and there's always the pretty one, male or female, if you're feeling excluded, you're going to try harder. And so it goes back to the base programming. If you can spot what somebody's doing, you said you used to spend your time spotting salesmen trying to mirror and match. This is both offense and defense as an understanding. If, a lot of you will all, as businessmen, have read Influence. If you understand those 7 principal things of influence, like social proofing, you look at any website now and you will see it there.
A couple of things in response to that. Is negging related in any way to gaslighting, where you're trying to undermine someone's confidence by feeding them false information or undermining their confidence in and instincts?
My interpretation of it is that, yes, it is about undermining their confidence. I mean, if I can, this might be a misremember, but if I can remember one scene in the book, he talks about how when he's out with these pickup artists, they introduce themselves to a group of pretty girls, and he kind of picks on the prettiest girl. And when he leans in to speak to her, he then offers her a stick of chewing gum, as if, and it's a subtle thing of as if of saying, oh, your breath's bad, and that's to undermine their confidence. I think gaslighting to me is something very, very different. Gaslighting is trying to persuade someone to, in the words of Orwell, ignore the truth of their own senses.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks. But the other thing is, I was going to pick up on somebody feeling ignored and therefore wanting to join the conversation. In my experience of NLP, the useful bit of it was learning to become aware of my own emotions and whether they were real and justified. When I discovered I was beginning to become aware of, not quite panic attack, uncertainty. What do I do next? Oh God, I better do something. This is something, let's do it. When you begin to recognize the early signs of that stress coming on, you can then say, hang on, is this real? Is it justified? And do I need to do anything about it? And what should I do? So you're changing what would have been an unconscious, subliminal set of actions into a conscious feedback. And I do know, I'm thinking of someone in my mind, I won't say who it is, it's not in this room, who does have a sense of being left out of conversations and does feel this very personally and emotionally. And they therefore interject into conversations. They pick up a word from things that two people are saying, often inappropriately, latch onto that word and then change the conversation direction, picking up on that word. The result is the rest of the room is left a bit puzzled, sort of where did that come from and why? And that person was behaving in that way because they felt they were being left out and they didn't want to be excluded. And they were actually, by responding in that way, they were encouraging the others to leave them out because their behavior wasn't appropriate. NLP taught me that an awareness or the ability to question your emotions and say, why am I feeling this? Is it real? Is it justified? What can I do about it? That was the big takeaway for me in my amateur days of reading a little bit about it. Is that, I have to ask Peter, is that a fair summary of one element of NLP, or am I?
I think it's a fair element of where my explorations have led me. I'm trying to avoid the word journey, Bill, because I know you hate it. I was so tempted. I don't know about you, but my best parenting conversations have never been when I've been angry.
True. Very, very true.
Emotions, as I look at them now, are a feedback on the clarity of my thinking. So I use them more as a barometer than I do a place to act from. So if I'm hot and bothered, I can't think of many times in my life where I've done things, man in low mood makes great decision. So if I'm in a low place, and if I'm in work, I always remember I used to work for a guy called Thomas Dietrich. We had an interesting relationship, but I always remember one of the greatest bits of wisdom he said. And somebody said to him, what do you do if you come in the office and you're just not in the mood? He says, I do the least harm possible. If I can defer a decision, if I can put it away, if I can get input, he said, when I know I'm in that space where I'm not seeing the world as it is. So we don't experience the world, we experience our thinking about the world. And our thinking about the world can change in an instant. Another one of the classic sort of coaching stories is the whole thing of, if my circumstances are making me happy, why can I be miserable on the beach in Hawaii? And why can you see kids playing in slums who look happy and full of joy and wisdom? And so it's got nothing to do with your circumstances. But people get really upset at the idea because that moves the locus of control from outside to inside. And you see it an awful lot in society at the moment. The I'll be happy when. The reality is, I know there's wars going on and conflicts, there's not a lot I can do about it. As tribal animals, we were dealt to deal with 15 close people and about 300 acquaintances. But 24-hour news media means we see every disaster everywhere in the world, and we weren't designed to do it. And the brain hasn't evolved that quickly.
Is NLP a way of dealing with this social media, fast change? We'll say fast change. I maintain things don't change quite as fast as people think, but the news changes every day.
I've changed my view on the Today programme. So when I left the UK, I used to love it. And I've come back, and what I've realised is they set a news story every day. Depending what's going on, it'll either be very local, UK-centric, or they'll keep spreading the net till they get anything. And if the world's a bit quiet, they'll dust off a special report or an investigation they've done. I mean, what was it I heard the other day? 66 people have complained. Isn't that a big number? Well, I'm like, no, I don't think 66 is a big number, really. I always remember famously they did incidents of drunken passengers on planes have increased 200%. That was it. And I looked at the data. And at this point, Ryanair have jumped on that. Yeah, no, don't buy we should ban alcohol in airports. So I can sell it to you on the plane. This was, but when you look at the data, it wasn't statistically relevant. I'm trying to remember the numbers, but I think it was less than 600 people had incidents. And if you think that Manchester Airport alone probably has 7 million people going through it, and then you probably assume that most of that was stag and hen parties on their way to various locations. The news isn't about informing you now. The news is about getting clicks. And what it's playing to is your brain is only ever trying to do three things. This is the best definition of neuroscience I've ever heard. I'd like to say I came up with it. I think I might have added one bit to it. Your brain is only ever trying to keep you alive, survive, thrive, and optimize. Stay alive, ideally reproduce, and do it using the least amount of energy possible, which is where habits come in. Pretty much you can boil anybody's behavior down to that. If you think your boss is picking on you, it makes sense to keep an eye on him. If you think that there's a nuclear bomb that might be dropped on your head, it makes sense to watch the news every day. During COVID, I got addicted. I spotted my habit of sitting down in front of the television at 5 o'clock every night to watch the briefing because COVID might kill me. Therefore, I'd better find out what's going on. And that's how we get habituated. And that is what social media does. That is what the games do. That's what the gambling apps do. Basically, they are giving you a dopamine hit or they're scaring the hell out of you. We're being played.
So you're presenting NLP as a cure, treatment, antidote, something you can do in response to addiction or habituated behaviors.
No, I'm not. I'm actually suggesting getting an understanding of some very basic neuroscience because I think NLP became overly complicated. So if I take an example of the phobia cure, which is it's a nice story as well, hopefully. Instead of studying phobias the way you would normally do it, that says, if you've got a phobia, come and talk to me. And we study people with phobias. And I'm scared of straight bananas or paper clips, whatever. What they did with Bandler and Grindler was they said, if you've had a phobia and you've got over it, can you come and talk to us and we'll pay you $10? And so what they modeled was the process in which people got over it. Significantly more useful, by the way. I reckon I did it with my son because he had a fear of organs in churches. And we were going to a wedding and he said to me, Dad, that phobia thing you can do, any chance we could do it because I don't want to be scared in the church? And I said, yeah, we had a chat. And he came back the next day, back to this non-task focus thing and said, oh yeah, I always remember when I was young, I was sat really close to the telly when it was the old the Beauty and the Beast, Disney, where he's playing the organ. And I've been scared of organs ever since. But the moment he'd seen it, it went away. So I'm actually more about getting to the root cause. And nobody will ever change unless they see the change, they experience the change. Most smokers can tell you what's going to kill, what a cigarette is doing to them. When a smoker realizes that they don't want that anymore, the change is a lot easier. And that's true in business, that's changing relationships, that's true in everywhere. So no, I think NLP got overly complicated.
When you say overly complicated, Peter, do you mean too processy, procedural, techniquey?
Yeah, I mean, it became about the techniques. I mean, some of the techniques I quite like, but if you explain the technique to somebody, there's a very famous technique done by Dalton, who modeled Walt Disney, and it's called the creative strategy. But Walt Disney went through a process which said he was the dreamer, there was a planner, and there was a critic. And he would put himself in those three positions. but the critic could only ever look at the plan, not the dream. And then he'd feed back through that loop. I've known companies create rooms that represent that and move teams into each room. But there's a process in there which, don't lose your dream, but it's all thinking. And so it became back to this controlling thing of you can't control your thoughts. Depending on which study you read, we get 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day. You just don't have to take everyone out for dinner.
I now see where you were coming from earlier when you said reductive. I wasn't quite with the reason for it, but I do see it now, reductive, reductionist. The NLP, people who are committed to NLP, do tend to reduce it to a set of steps, a set of procedures, and you have to learn them and apply them, which leaves you in a little bit of difficulties when you come to a different set of circumstances that you haven't learned about or the situation changes. So I get that. So I have a question, which is, learning neuroscience is probably beyond most people. No, sorry, not beyond most people. They don't have the time for it. Reading Nietzsche is interesting, but most people don't have the time for that either, plus all of the people that went before him. And is there a route that you take people down instead of NLP? Because it was learning about NLP without actually doing the course that taught me quite a bit on the holistic rather than the reductionist side. So where would you recommend people look?
I think the first thing is to say, I think people have when they calm down enough to be quiet, they have an insight into this anyway. So some of the analogies I've used today, like spiders, if spiders were scary, we'd all be scared of spiders. It's not like gravity. It's not a fundamental truth. It's a personal truth. So I think there's a thing called, I once went on a course where it's called Just Enough Project Management, the time when everybody was doing Prince 2. And you're like, no, genuinely, that's not going to work. I think there's just enough neuroscience. If people were to put half the energy and effort into learning, I would say 5 to 7 things that even the survive, thrive, optimize thing. If you apply that to most situations, you can say to them, what's this person trying to do? And listen to their language. If you think about the fluidity of memory. So one of my favorite questions from when I did my neuroscience course was, what do you think the purpose of memory is? I don't know what your response would be, but memory isn't meant to be photographic. That's why people get phobias. Oh God, a dog jumped out and scared me when I was 4. Body goes, be scared of dogs, they might kill you. And it remembers it in an instant and it hardwires it. The classic saying in neuroscience is neurons that fire together wire together. And you build a stronger connection. A lot of the NLP techniques are actually about reversing the connections. If you look at the phobia cure, it fundamentally tries to reverse the connections. It talks about you doing it in rewind, putting funny money up. You mess with the memory. We all know those case studies where you can convince people they went on a balloon ride when they were 5 when they never did because you've doctored the photos. So if you can just tell somebody, by the way, don't build your life on your memories because your memories are BS. The right person in the right, it's how many people go, oh, well, this happened to me when I was 5. It's not happening now, is it? No, but it happened when I was 5. How many times do you think about it? Sounds trite, but when you start thinking about it, why don't you notice and stop? The understanding that your experience doesn't come from what's happening around you. It comes from how you're interpreting it. So I actually don't think there is a lot of neuroscience to use. I think you could get down to a sort of 7 habits type brief of you just need to know this, as Cialdini did with Influence. That's a lovely book. It reads really well. I still enjoy it. I still recommend it to everybody. And I think it's a game changer because you immediately go, 23 hours left on this offer. Okay, putting me under pressure. 75 people out of 100. 25 more people are looking at this hotel at the same time you are, right? That book in 7 very easy lessons, if you read it and understand it, is a game changer, both offensively and defensively. I don't know if that makes sense.
What as a practical advice I would give to everyone is to step back once in a while and reflect a little bit on these things one way or the other. Not only in consulting, but I think in business in general, we tend to spend the majority of our time extremely with the rational part of our brain and think we are completely rational, and everything else that goes into the area of psychology is nothing for us. The very best training I ever ever attended to, and I was pretty old at that time. I think I was already in my late 40s, so way too late if you really think about it, was a training where, as part of the curriculum, we had access to super high-end, super professional therapists. I would have never signed up voluntarily for a therapy session, but having that extremely easy chance to give it a try and talk to someone about these things made such a difference and really opened the space so much wider, and it made me reflect on certain things that I think that was the very best experience I ever had in a training class. What I also think is what you just said at the end is that, coming back to the NLP thing, NLP I think has three different perspectives. It's what NLP can do for you, how you can use NLP to do something to others in a positive or negative way, and how NLP can be used from others to influence you. And for the latter, I think it is absolutely important and necessary to understand some of these basic principles in order not to be, or to be at least a little bit less manipulated. I think we cannot avoid it entirely, but at least to be a little bit more aware when someone else is manipulating us, whether you're then using it for self-improvement, up for everyone to decide, and whether you use it to influence others. We are using it in order to convince people on what we truly believe is right, which is not necessarily always just done if you bring the rational argument across. Very often you have to package it in a certain way so that the other party really follows your advice, follows your guidance.
We should be finishing soon, coming to an end. Anything that people would like to say and haven't said? Ciaran, I think you were going to come in at one point.
I was just going to come in on kind of the general comment there about how we are almost constantly nowadays psychologically manipulated via social media, via how supermarkets place things on shelves. You go, and I was booking flights to go home next week, and I'm looking at a seat on Ryanair, and I'm being told that 7 people are also looking at that very seat, and so book now. And I just had a thought while we were discussing this. Probably it's not an original thought, is that I would say that probably a lot of NLP techniques have made their way into what is now known in Silicon Valley as the algorithm.
Absolutely. That's what I was saying to Bill when we talked prior to this, is I see an awful lot of NLP now, the language patterns. So there's two language patterns in NLP. One's called the meta model, which is about listening. The other one is called the Milton model. Milton was a hypnotist who did hypnotherapy through conversation. One of the things he used to do is, if you quote somebody, now how many books do you read now where there's a quote at the beginning or an end of a passage? The way you can structure language to change somebody's thinking. So I had a boss who always thought that one of my team, who was really high performing, was passive aggressive, and I was getting nowhere. And did my NLP, came back, sat down, we were doing the calibration, and I said, how would you know if she wasn't? That's a very different mindset. Because all of a sudden you're now going, all right, and they're going to give you the answer. So if you're in business and you go, if this deal works and we provide you with the perfect product, how would you know? And you write them down and then you deliver that. It's just a different way of doing it, but fundamentally people will give you the answer. What does success look like? So I recently took over presidency of a charity, and you talk to everybody and they all went, oh, we want a thriving organization. And I went, well, okay, so if we came back 5 years from now, what would thriving look like? And everybody had a different answer. So the problem was the board of trustees all agreed on thriving and then all thought it was different. And that's where the power is in this. Because that, if we go back to what I said earlier about generalization, the word thriving is a generalization. You know, the other one at the moment is, what does diverse mean? I'm a great believer in cognitive diversity, and I will plug a book if anybody wants to read it called Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed. Best management book I've ever read. And so this is practical, but people in business are more focused, and procurement in particular, Bill, which is our background, on it's the deal, it's the cost of delivery, it's the cost of acquisition, it's the cost of, and you're like, hang on, you're going to have less people to manage. You don't understand how you work, and you don't understand how your people you manage work, and you're not aware of how your customers work. But I'll crack on and learn more about AI.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's often a substitute for actually delving into what they actually want or need. Right. Well, I think we are coming to an end now. I want to thank Peter for a really insightful discussion, and Armin and Ciaran for some fantastic questions. That's been super. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. That's the end of another Swishoes podcast. This time we were looking at neuro-linguistic programming. I'm looking forward to the next one, which might be about personality typing. Okay, thank you, everyone. Bye.